I didn't think it mattered that he always waited until everyone else left. At first, it felt respectful. Professional, even. He never crossed a line. Never touched me. Never said anything that could be quoted out of context. He just stayed, a few seconds longer than necessary, as if silence itself was part of the conversation. I told myself I was imagining things. That I was projecting meaning onto nothing. But I started noticing patterns. How his questions came late. How his eyes stayed calm when mine didn't. How he never filled pauses the way other people rushed to do. One evening, he said, "You don't like being interrupted." It wasn't a question. I asked how he knew. He shrugged. Most people reveal themselves when they think no one is watching. That was the first time I felt something tighten in my chest. Because I couldn't remember ever telling him that. And yet, he was right. I began paying attention to myself around him. The way my voice softened without intention. The way I chose words more carefully. The way I waited for his reaction before deciding how I felt. It disturbed me, not because he asked for it, but because he didn't. He never complimented me directly. He never criticized me either. Instead, he described me. Accurately. Calmly. As if he were reading from notes I didn't know I'd written. Once, he said, "You're more honest when you think you're alone." I laughed it off. Made a joke. But later, I replayed every moment I'd assumed privacy. Every unguarded breath. Every quiet decision. I realized then that he wasn't gathering information the way curious people do. He was observing outcomes. And the worst part was how safe I felt while being seen so clearly. The first boundary didn't break, it dissolved. There was no argument. No turning point. Just a moment where I stopped correcting him when he made assumptions about me. Because correcting him felt unnecessary. He noticed immediately. "You're adapting," he said, not unkindly. I asked him to what? "To being understood," he replied. That should have scared me. Instead, it felt like relief. Like I'd been carrying tension I didn't know how to name, and someone had finally identified it. That night, alone, I tried to define what was happening. There was no manipulation I could point to. No demand. No threat. Just a growing awareness that my inner world was no longer private. And that I hadn't done anything to stop it. After that, I started noticing how often I adjusted without being asked. I stayed later. I answered questions more fully. I stopped deflecting with humor. None of it felt forced. That was the problem. Every change felt like my own decision, rational, even necessary. He never acknowledged the shift. He just responded to it, seamlessly, as if he'd expected it all along. One evening, I asked him if he ever got tired of listening so closely. He looked at me for a moment, then said, "Listening is easy. Most people tell you everything if you give them enough silence." That sentence stayed with me. Because I realized how rarely he spoke about himself. How little space he took up. It wasn't mystery, it was absence. And somehow, that absence had begun to shape the room around us. I tried to create distance again. Not by disappearing, but by pulling inward. I shared less. I kept my thoughts to myself. I answered briefly. I told myself this was balance, that I was reclaiming something. He noticed within minutes. "You're protecting something," he said quietly. I denied it. He didn't argue. Later, he added, almost casually, people usually protect what they've already given away. That night, I felt exposed in a way I couldn't explain. Not because he'd taken something from me, but because he'd named it before I had. I started wondering when he'd begun to recognize patterns in me that I was still calling moods. And whether he was waiting for me to catch up. The first time he touched me, it was deliberate and brief. He reached out to stop me from turning away, his fingers closing gently around my wrist. No pressure. No urgency. Just enough to make the moment still. Stay, he said. Not a request. Not a command. I did. He let go immediately, as if the contact had never happened. As if it hadn't shifted something fundamental inside me. But my body remembered. The calm didn't return right away. It lingered, uneven, unfamiliar. And for the first time, I felt a question forming that I hadn't allowed myself before. Not what does he want from me? But why do I want him to want me? And once that question existed, I knew I was already further in than I'd planned. After that, silence stopped feeling empty. When he wasn't there, I noticed the absence immediately. Not because I missed him, I told myself that wasn't it, but because everything felt louder. Less precise. Conversations blurred together. My thoughts lost their sharpness. I caught myself thinking, he would understand this, and then froze at how natural that thought felt. When he returned, nothing changed on the surface. Same calm tone. Same measured distance. But I realized I was leaning toward him now, emotionally, not physically, waiting for him to confirm things I no longer trusted myself to define. Once, I said something impulsive. Too honest. I waited for correction. He didn't offer one. You don't need approval, he said. You need clarity. And suddenly, I wasn't sure which one I'd been seeking all along. The second boundary disappeared without notice. He began finishing my sentences, not aloud, but with his eyes. A look that said I already know where this goes. It should have annoyed me. Instead, it made me feel efficient. As if I was finally being read at the right speed. I tested it once. Said something deliberately misleading. Watched his reaction. He didn't correct me. Later, when we were alone, he said, that wasn't true. I asked why he hadn't said anything. Because lies are useful, he replied. They show you where someone thinks they should be. That night, I realized he wasn't interested in who I pretended to be. He was mapping the distance between my words and my instincts. And he was letting me walk it myself. The first time I said no, he accepted it immediately. No hesitation. No disappointment. No pushback. That should have reassured me. Instead, it unsettled me, because I understood what it meant. He wasn't testing my limits. He was watching how I set them. Later, he said, "You say no like you're leaving room." I asked what that meant. He didn't answer right away. Then, you don't close doors. You pause in doorways. That was when it clicked. He wasn't waiting for permission. He was waiting for certainty. And the quiet truth I hadn't admitted yet was this. I hadn't decided what I wanted him to stop doing. I'd only been deciding how long I could stay undecided. The choice didn't arrive as a moment. It arrived as permission. He didn't ask for anything. He simply spoke as if a certain closeness was already assumed, not physical, but internal. As if a door had been unlocked weeks ago and we were only now acknowledging that it had never been closed again. You don't need to decide tonight, he said once. You already have. You're just catching up to it. I wanted to argue. To insist that I was still weighing options. But the truth landed quietly, without resistance. I wasn't choosing between yes and no. I was choosing between honesty and delay. And delay had started to feel dishonest. The night everything settled, there was no tension in the air. No raised voices. No dramatic pause. We were sitting across from each other, talking about something unimportant. I don't even remember what. At some point, I realized I hadn't checked the time in hours. You're comfortable, he observed. I nodded. Comfort is dangerous, he continued. It convinces you nothing needs to change. I asked him if he believed that. I know it, he said. Because comfort is where people stop protecting themselves. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because I felt it, the moment where awareness becomes acceptance. Where you stop pretending you're outside something and admit you're already inside it. The last boundary didn't disappear. I stepped over it. No pressure. No signal from him. Just a decision I made quietly, fully aware of what it meant. I told him something I'd promised myself I'd never tell anyone. Not because it was dramatic, but because it gave context. And context gives power. He listened. Completely still. When I finished, he said only one thing. That explains why you let me stay. I waited for regret. For fear. For the instinct to take it back. It didn't come. What came instead was clarity, sharp and undeniable. I could still walk away. But I would never again be able to say I didn't understand what staying meant. And that knowledge felt heavier than any restraint I'd imagined before. After that, control stopped being something I analyzed. It became something I lived inside. Nothing about my days looked different from the outside. I still made my own choices. Still spoke freely. Still moved through the world without restriction. And yet, every decision passed through a quiet filter first. How will this land with him? He never corrected me. Never interfered. He didn't need to. The awareness of him had settled deep enough to guide me on its own. Once, I asked him if this was what he'd wanted all along. He didn't answer immediately. Wanting implies lack, he said. I don't lack anything. That was the moment I understood the imbalance. He hadn't been gaining control. I had been surrendering uncertainty. The realization didn't frighten me the way it should have. It grounded me. I stopped questioning my reactions. Stopped pretending the dynamic was accidental. I saw it clearly now, not as manipulation, but as alignment I had chosen to step into. You could leave, he reminded me once, calmly. I nodded. I knew that. But you won't, he added, without certainty, without challenge. Just observation. He was right. Not because I was trapped. But because leaving would mean returning to the noise. The guessing. The constant negotiation with myself. Here, everything felt defined. And I had learned something uncomfortable about myself. Clarity mattered more to me than freedom ever had. I don't tell this story as a warning. Nothing bad happened. Nothing dramatic. No moment I can point to and say this is where I lost myself. Because I didn't lose myself. I recognized myself. I understood how easily I adapt to structure. How naturally I respond to quiet authority. How willing I am to trade chaos for control, as long as it feels intentional. He never raised his voice. Never forced my hand. Never told me who to be. He just stayed still long enough for me to choose. And that's the part people never understand when I try to explain it. The most dangerous thing wasn't him. It was how clearly I saw myself. Once I stopped resisting what I wanted,